Back when I was growing up on the border of Canton Township and Wayne, Michigan on the west side, I used to tell people for years I was from Wayne, even though we lived across the street in Canton. Canton was all dirt roads and farms. Now it's a big suburb like Warren and Sterling Heights, but back then it wasn't. Across the street was Wayne. Wayne was an old town with 2 Ford plants. Everybody knew Wayne. And that was where the zip code was for our mailings. Anyway, across the street in Wayne, because we lived on the border, were my friends, Jim and John Fick. Play basketball together, play touch football together, play board games together. You're friends as you grow up. Then in high school, they moved away. It's not too far away, but they moved and they sold their house. And the person who bought their house was a Mr. Beasley. It's a name you don't forget, because he's a person you can't forget. Mr. Beasley was born in Scotland. He came to the United States and formed kind of like a cement construction company. And he made his fortune. And at the ripe old age of 84, he decided to close his company. His son always thought he would inherit the company, but he was mistaken. He had one son, he had no daughters. The son was his one employee. Instead, Mr. Beasley decided all of his stuff that he had, including cement mixers and 6 commercial wheelbarrows, that he would keep with him. And he had it shipped in a truck, loaded and driven by his son, to the house across the street where we lived. And we got to watch the spectacle of this poor guy in his upper 50s himself being yelled at by his 80-some-year-old dad about how they wasn't moving fast enough and where he was going to put the stuff, unload all of this equipment. They put it in the garage from floor to ceiling. He took a bunch of stuff in the house. It turns out we found out that 2 of the 3 bedrooms were crammed with boxes of his stuff, as was the entire basement. It began to rain halfway through this enterprise, and my dad felt sorry for the guy unloading it, so he walked across the street and helped unload. And when all the unloading got done, and my dad was soaked to the bone, my dad asked old Mr. Beasley, "I notice you have 6 of these wheelbarrows. I'd sure like to have one." And Mr. Beasley said, "Sure, for $50. This is 1973, $50. Okay, that was the last time my dad ever crossed the street to see Mr. Beasley. But there's more to the story. Like I said, the son was the only child. Mr. Beasley had a wife, the mother of the son. She was very ill, and Mr. Beasley refused to take her to a nursing home, He was going to take care of her himself and feed her oatmeal 3 times a day, because that was the cure-all as far as Mr. Beasley was concerned. Besides, it was cheap. You'll catch this theme about this guy. He would brag about every nickel he ever saved. He would brag about all the savings he made over the years. He would brag about the fact that his hard work and his business acumen enabled him to acquire an awful lot of stuff. We knew, we saw it all unloaded. Well, just under 2 years later, Mr. Beasley decides to move to Florida. And so he does rent a truck. And then, of course, has his son come to load that truck up. And we got to watch his son load all the stuff with Mr. Beasley yelling at him saying, "You got to pack it in tighter. I'm not going to rent this for 1 extra day. All of it has to go in one load." And stack and stack and stack he did. This time my dad just watched. And load that truck he did. Top to bottom, side to side. You couldn't have put a shoebox into that truck when that son was done packing that truck. And then the son, and the mother, and Mr. Beasley got in the cab of that truck, and off they drove. 3 weeks later, Mr. Beasley dies. So there's all this stuff unloaded at this place in Florida. Poor Mrs. Beasley is now the son decides to finally do something Mr. Beasley refused to do, take her to a doctor. The doctor said, this woman's suffering from malnutrition. What have you been feeding her? You know, Dad just gave her oatmeal. This woman needs vitamins. This woman needs an IV. This woman needs all kinds of things. The poor soul was very weakened, though, and she only lasted 6 more months. And as for the son, he had the biggest, fastest yard sale you can imagine. And what wasn't sold, he took to the dump. I think of him when I think of this reading, because in the reading, the guy has more than enough. But he doesn't say, I'll give some of this grain away to the poor. He doesn't think, how can I help anybody else? This is all going to be for him. Everything's for him. You see, he lived for his stuff. Mr. Beasley lived for his stuff. But the message that Jesus is telling us when he says, thus it will be for all who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich when it matters to God. Jesus knows we need food. He knows we need a roof over our head. He knows we need clothes. Probably knows we need a car. He knows we need things to function in this world. We need stuff. Jesus knows that. But the stuff is in order for us to live. We're not supposed to live for the stuff.